Hey guys. Um, so I wanted to come back and do a second video on concerning the upcoming eclipse on April 8th. I know I have a past video um, where it's about 48 minutes long and I go into a lot of details. Um, and I know it's long, and I'm sorry for that, but sometimes if you really want to understand something, you got to take the time to explain it, and I think it's important to know. Well, since then, I have been doing some more research, and I've come across some other things that I want to share that I think are awesome and important to it. Um, I know there's a lot of videos out there talking about it, and again, I found some really good ones, a lot of speculative things. And a lot of people are kind of getting sick of hearing about it because it's like, a lot of hype is being built up around this eclipse. And more than likely, this eclipse is going to come and go, and everybody's going to look around, hold their breath, nothing's going to happen. And they're going to go on and say, yep, see, told you so. Well, here's the thing, they don't understand it. And yes, it's not a doomsday thing like the end of the world is going to happen on April 8th with this eclipse. That's not what I'm saying, and that's not what most people who are speaking on it are saying. Now, there are people out there that like to, you know, do what some call fear porn, and they like to just go off into la la land with every single thing. But that's not me. So, anyway, I just wanted to clarify that and get into some of the other information I have. Now, I'm just going to review a little bit that and you really want to see my first video and listen to that before going into this video because some things might not make sense if you don't. So, in the previous video, I talked about the eclipse as it relates to the four blood moons. It was known as the tetrad blood moons of 2014 and 15. John Hagee and I think it was Mark Biltz, if I'm saying this right. I might not be. And it was Mark something. They basically popularized it. They said it was like the beginning of something, the beginning, the end. And a lot of people understood it as meaning something significant. It fell on Jewish feast on Passover and Sukkot for 2 years. And it was the first time it had happened since 1967, which, if you know your history, that was when the Six-Day War happened. It was around that time. And then in 1948, when Israel became a nation, and then in 1493, after the Spanish Inquisition started. And these were like timestamps throughout history that showed a correlation between the signs in the sun, moon, and stars that God put in the heavens for us, according to Genesis, to regulate and understand times and seasons and signal us when things were about to happen or change in history, to help us know that He is the sovereign God over all of creation. It's His story, it's His history. He's written it, He's the author and finisher of it. And I talked about this sign and how the Lord had showed me how it relates to this kind of phenomenon that's been going on for several years, where people talk about seeing the numbers 1111 or on the clock 1111 and all this speculation. What does it mean? And people get into the meaning of the numbers, where 11 could mean anything from chaos to transition. And they talk about different things, but basically for me, the Lord gave me a revelation on it. You can go back to the other video and watch it and what it means. It is like a timestamp. It's like a clock, and 2014 and 15 were very significant to that. And one of the things that I read into that when I saw it, I guess read into it's not the right word, but the Lord related it back to the feast, which was Passover being the first feast in Tabernacles, or otherwise known as Sukkot, Feast of Booths, is the last feast. And through that, I understood that He was saying, I am the first and the last, the Aleph and the Tav. And that connects to, which, you know, like I said, you have to go into the video, watch it. It's really awesome. It's worth a watch. It's worth the wait to understand the things that the Lord had showed me. And not just me only, there's others out there too, you know, who have come up with things that I've seen, and it's like, hey, you know, that makes sense to me, and it fits into what the Lord's showing me. You know, we see in part, we know in part. Not everybody knows everything, but God gives us enough to where it tells a story and gives us an understanding of what he wants us to know. So, you know, the blood moon's related to the 11:11, which correlates back to Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11, which has to do with Israel, ironically, and God restoring them back to their land. So anyway, this idea of 11:11 also straddles across American history, because America, like Israel, the only two nations in the world that ever have a covenant with God, made a covenant which started with America. It was in 1620 on November 11th, and that's on the old Julian calendar, whereas on the modern Gregorian calendar, it would come up, the date would be November 21st of 1620. So there's that discrepancy, and you just have to know that on the old calendar it was November 11th. And why does that matter? Because on November 11th, the Mayflower Compact, there was a covenant that was signed by those people on that ship to dedicate the land to God. And it was from that covenant that America got its infancy. The infancy of that, our country started. And you can follow that thought all the way through George Washington when he was elected and he prayed in New York. He reiterated that Mayflower Compact covenant, and then it just kind of goes through history from there. It wasn't the Declaration of Independence that started it all. It was the Mayflower Compact of 1620. And see, that was signed on November 11th. So what's the significance there? Well, that's the 11th month and the 11th day of that year, 11:11. See the correlation? Goes back through the scriptures, and all the way back to the blood moons, which has the idea behind it of the Aleph and the Tav, which also relates to the eclipses that many people have been talking about, including myself. When the eclipses, the path of the eclipses creates this, what looks like a giant A over the United States, which is actually the Paleo-Hebrew of the bull, and embedded within that you can find in two different places where the three eclipses cross paths, actually creates a Tav. So written across the skies of America is an Aleph and a Tav embedded within the path of the solar eclipses. Completely awesome. Like I said, go back to the video and you can watch it. Now, what's interesting, and the reason I'm bringing this all up is because a lot of people have talked about how the different eclipses, like the first one in 2017 passed through a bunch of Salems. The one in 2024 is going to pass through a bunch of Ninevehs. These are cities that were in the path of totality of these eclipses. But then you have this oddball one that's an annual eclipse that goes also from Oregon and then dumps down off in Texas. And it's like, okay, what about that one? But so there's a religious connotation that a lot of people have taken with these eclipses, and they found all these cities and all these names, and you know, anything from Little Egypt, which is on the New Madrid seismic zone, to Rapture, a town called Rapture or something, which God only knows why these towns got these names. I don't know, but it is interesting and it's cool, which is a biblical understanding. But there's a better understanding, I think, that, and that's good. Those are good, but there's a better understanding and a more important one that I think is being overlooked, simply because people don't know. Some people, I guess, don't know how to look at it, and this is something the Lord showed me, and that's what I want to show you guys. So, and I have a little notepad here that I'm referring to. That's why I'm looking over to my side, because there's a lot of, you know, facts and things that I want to get into. And plus there's something else the Lord showed me, a little bonus, that some scientists discovered that I also want to tell you about that plays into this. So the first eclipse, the Great American Eclipse, kicked off in 2017. It went over from Oregon and dumped off in South Carolina. Now, what's interesting about this one, it was the first one in our country since 1918, okay, to cross America coast to coast from the Pacific to the Atlantic. And it was also the first one to make landfall exclusively in the United States since 1776. Now, the eclipse in 1776, if you want to look it up, it took place November 30th, 1776. Okay, so why does that matter? Those two dates, obviously, if you're American, they should jump out at you. In 1918, that was the end of World War One, or I'm sorry, World War Two. That war officially ended in November 11th, believe it or not, at 11 o'clock. They signed the papers and ended World War One, not two. I don't know if I said that wrong, but that's what I meant, World War One. And the reason that matters is because we started to ascend as a world superpower after World War One. By the end of World War Two, we were a world superpower. And again, that date, November 11th, at 11 a.m., connects all the way back to 1620 on a November 11th when the Mayflower Compact was signed. See the connection there? Now, the other thing is about this eclipse in 2017, it also was the first one exclusively in the United States since 1776, which I told you that eclipse happened in November 30th of 1776. And on the old calendar, it would have been November 19th, just 8 days after the Mayflower Compact was signed and they landed on, I think originally it was Cape Cod, and then they sailed up and went to Plymouth. So in 1776, that was when we signed the Declaration of Independence. Obviously, something having to do with the land. And so the 2017 eclipse was tied back to the year of 1918, and you can look this up on Wikipedia. That's where I found it. And it was tied back to 1776, two very important dates in our history. And the date of 1918 could be directly linked back to the Mayflower Compact, which was literally on the same day. And it was just, hundreds of years apart or whatever, 100 and some years apart. So what I'm getting at is when I'm talking about this first eclipse, the first thing you see when you're looking at this quote unquote sign, if God gives us signs to give us an understanding, to know what something means, you have to know how to read it. It's kind of like reading a book. Well, the first thing that sticks out to me is this specific eclipse is tied back to a lot of the history of the United States, which makes it important because if something is linked back to your history, that means you might want to go back into your history and see what is significant about that. Okay, let's see here. Let me go on. Okay. So that's kind of what got me started. I mean, I've been looking after these things well before the tetrad moons that happened in 2014. Prophecy has always been something for me that I've greatly enjoyed. Since I was 13 years old, I've been kind of following it, studying it. I'm a Christian, love the Lord. And it's just so amazing to me to look at things that have prophetically been stated in the Bible and to watch them come to pass, see things in my own day, my own life, and just see how God does these things. So that's kind of a review. There's a lot more than that in the other video that ties it together better, and I just kind of went through it in a flurry because I really want to get to the point of this video and how these eclipses are tied to history. And I will say that the 2024 eclipse on April 8th is also tied to a calendar date of Nisan 1. And some of you may know that, but so what you see is you see calendar dates of America in 2017 being tied to that one, and then a calendar date of Israel's religious New Year being tied to the one in 2024. And then obviously you have the annular eclipse, which makes the Aleph Tav sign, which basically means beginning and end. And isn't it the Lord who says in Revelation, he's the Aleph Tav, the Alpha and Omega? And he says somewhere in the scriptures that he is the God who declares the end from the beginning. So what is the statement being said over our nation? Why would you mark it out? Why would you do these things? Well, before I get into that, I want to talk to you about the thing that I discovered in 1981. I'm not sure what it was I was doing. I don't know how I'd come across this stuff, but the Lord always finds a way to make it happen, right? I came across a study of someone who, and this matters. This really matters because of what I think's coming. There was a guy named, his name was Dr. Raymond Arvinson, I think is how you pronounce it. And there were others. I went to NASA.gov. There was a Catholic site. They reported on it too. You can Google it and look it up. And you can actually get the original white papers through a link on that site that will show you the study. But this guy, Dr. Raymond, he was out of Washington University in St. Louis. In 1981, he discovered a crack, you could call it, that went from just north. It was in Washington, between Washington and Oregon area, up into the British Columbia area. Over there, he discovered this crack, a 1,700-mile long crack that went all the way down across the United States to the New Madrid seismic zone. And if you want to know the fault in that area, it's called the Cascadia subduction zone. It's a subduction type plate slippage where you have one plate sliding under the other and kind of backing it up like this, and it does a certain type of, if it would ever go off, it would be like a thrust earthquake, which is different than like if you had the San Andreas where they go, the fault lines go like this, they slip past each other. So it's a different type of earthquake, and because of the way the one is in the Cascadia subduction zone, it has the ability to unleash, and has in history unleashed earthquakes over 9.0, I think 9.1 or something like that, and it has done that. So anyway, this researcher, he found this crack from in that area, and it was a 17-mile crack that stretched from the Appalachian Mountains, from Washington to Appalachian Mountains. But there were some new discoveries that more recently have extended this crack all the way from Washington State to the Pacific Ocean, around Port Angeles, Washington, and all the way down into Missouri, which goes into where the New Madrid fault zone is. And basically that would make the 1,700-mile wide crack about 2,200 miles total, from all the way to the port in Washington and all the way down to Missouri. So what he used a technology, it's called, to figure this out, it's a processing technique. He processed over 600,000 gravity measurements, was the way they found this crack, over a period of 20 years when they were doing this research. They took all the scientific data they had and they synthesized it to make a map to show basically where this crack was. And I believe, I'm not sure if it's the NASA one. There's actually a video on YouTube. Someone else was talking about it and they showed the map of where this crack goes. And anyway, so they found this crack, and then a second crack later was found, go running from basically from southwest to northeast. And this one's about 60 miles by 30 miles, and it's underlying the Mississippi River Valley. It's called the Reef Foot Rift. It was found to cross through the Missouri gravity low area, which is a term they use when they do their processing technique to figure out where these cracks are. Basically, the two zones, the one that goes from Washington all the way down to Missouri, and this other one that goes from it's like the southwest up to the northeast. Interestingly enough, they cross over at the New Madrid seismic zone like an X. And if you look at the map, that I found on this guy's YouTube video, they, ironically enough, make a path that is the same, very, very closely, like the eclipse in 2017, when it came from Oregon and it crossed over and dumped off in South Carolina. And then you have the other one that's coming from Texas in 2024, and it's going to go up and out through like the top of Maine and whatever into Canada. Those two eclipses also cross at the New Madrid seismic zone. Now, something years and years ago that the Lord told me through a family member is that someday there was going to be a very nasty earthquake up there at the Cascadia subduction zone. And the reason I learned about earthquakes is because I used to live in California between two sister faults, and I think in 2011, and that was when the great Japanese earthquake happened and caused a giant tsunami. And it got me worried about earthquakes and tsunamis since I lived between the two sister fault zones and I wanted to learn about them. So anyway, I learned about the Cascadia subduction zone, and someone had told me that they felt that there would be an earthquake there, and I started learning about it. Sure enough, there is one due to go off there, and something in my mind when I was looking at how this subduction zone type earthquake would happen, it could lead, I thought in my mind, because of the tremendous amount of force and shifting. If you know anything about the North American craton plate and how it operates, is when you have pressure released here, like say up in Washington, the pressure will travel down and follow the craton plate and then go up out the other side of the East Coast. And I learned this through a guy who has been studying earthquakes and how they work for years. His name is Dutch Sense. So just give him a shout out. I like what he does. I like his research, and I've been watching him for over 10 years, and he definitely, there's something to what he does. So it's helped me out a lot, and I saw that there could be a connection between an earthquake going off on the West Coast and causing the New Madrid to go off. Why does that matter? Well, this crack that the scientists found, and I didn't know it even existed, it cuts right across the craton plate, which is supposed to be a solid plate, as far as I know, and it connects Washington to the New Madrid. What are the odds of that? What is, it's just amazing to me. And this was been known since 1981 when this research first started, that there was this link that links the two together. I didn't know that until just recently, and that's just more information that surrounds these eclipses and their paths and what they cross, and all these things that again relate to our history, relate to our country. And it's just it screams to me that the Lord is trying to show us something, that even on a scientific level, there is a possibility, there is a link between where these eclipses come in, where major fault zones are. And it really matters, because one of the things I have been feeling and others have been talking about, some which I know personally and respect, they feel that there could possibly be an earthquake coming along with this eclipse on the New Madrid seismic zone. I think that is a possibility. It's always a possibility, but specifically because of the different things that are surrounding the idea of this earthquake. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. I want to stick with my notes so I don't screw it up, because there's a lot of things that I want to touch on here. Why do I think that? Well, if we go back to history, okay, in the New Madrid seismic zone, there was also, which some people have talked about this, and there's so many things that correlate that just show this is not by accident. And I don't believe anything is by accident. I believe God does everything with a purpose, on purpose. Okay, He doesn't do accidents, and He controls everything. He even says, "I'm the one who creates disaster." Now, just before I open that can of worms, God is not willing that any should perish and that all should reach repentance. but there is a reason for judgment. Judgment is not just because God's so angry and wants to go and squash people. That's the last thing God wants to do. What we don't understand oftentimes about judgment is judgment puts the fear of God in us and causes us to rethink things that we do and repent, whereas otherwise maybe we wouldn't repent, which is, I'm going to get to that thought too, because I think that's the point of this whole thing. Anyway, so if you guys go back into history and you look in from around 1811 to 1812, the New Madrid seismic zone went off, and there was some very significant, some of the largest earthquakes in history went off in the New Madrid seismic zone. What's interesting, and here's where I correlate what I think's coming. September 17th, 1811, there was a solar eclipse. Okay. And just not even a month later, November 6th, let me see here. Let me see if I got that right. Let's see. Yeah, I think okay, November 6th at the 1806 preemptive strike. This might have been like the beginning of the war. I'm not really sure. I might have that date wrong. I'll have to go back and check it. But anyway, there was a preemptive strike by the U.S. to begin this thing called the Tecumseh War. Now, so there was a solar eclipse in September 17, 1811. By December 16th, the earthquakes that rocked the United States started on the New Madrid seismic zone. And they continued through 1812, during the War of 1812. If you look at history, that was between Great Britain and America. Okay, so here you have earthquakes and wars going on in our country, and the greatest earthquake that, ever hit that area. So what's another thing that's interesting is during this time of this war, when these earthquakes were going on between Great Britain and America, there was a comet. It was visible for 17 months, and it was the brightest during the earthquakes. It was called the Tecumseh Comet, or Neapolitan's Comet in Europe. That's what they called it there. You can look it up. So, and finally, the last earthquake that took place during these series of earthquakes ended February 7th of 1812.